we consider our decisions and actions. This morning, there is a public meeting scheduled for 2 consent and 4 minor variance applications. I will be briefly summarizing the procedure to utilize for the meeting. First, the Secretary Treasurer will advise the committee as to when, how, and to whom notice of each of the hearings was circulated for the applications being considered. Next, each of the applications will be considered separately. Planning staff will advise the purpose and effect of the applications and provide any other information that is relevant. The Secretary Treasurer will summarize any correspondence on file. From there, the applicant will make a brief presentation if they so choose, and the public will have the opportunity to speak to the application being considered. After the public forum, the committee will then deliberate on the proposed applications and consider a motion to pass, defeat, or defer the decision for the application. The consent application being considered this morning are B 23-2 for 217 Muskie Bay Road, B 22-22 for 213 Duffys Lane. The minor variance application being considered are A 22-23 for 855 Kings Farm Road and A 2304 for 503 Berwick Road. Are there any declarations of pecuniary interests? Seeing none, we will move to adoption of the minutes. So moved by Louise Rivet, seconded by Tony Schmidt. Be it resolved that the Township of Georgian Bay Committee of Adjustments approves the minutes of March 10th, 2023 as circulated. All those in favor, please signify by raising your hand. Carried. Thank you. Okay, be it resolved that the Township of Georgian Bay Committee of Adjustment adopts the agenda dated April 14th, 2023. Sorry, that was moved by Stephen Jarvis and seconded by Steve Predko. All those in favor, please signify by raising your hand. Thank you. Madam Secretary.
Notice of each of the applications was sent by first-class mail to the respective owners and assessed persons within 120, 500 meters, and 800 meters, or to those persons and agencies likely to have an interest in the application. The notices were sent at least 20 days prior to this morning's meeting. Included in each notice was an explanation of the purpose and effect of the application and a key map showing the location of the property. Other relevant information may also have been provided. These circulations were provided in accordance with provisions of the Planning Act 1990.
Thank you, Sydney. She should be sitting here, not me, I think. Over to the planner for the first application.
Going, Mr. Chair, committee members. Here we go. Application 2302 for Szymanski. As you mentioned, on 217 Muskie Bay Road. The application is to sever 13.1 hectares of land from 2017 Muskie Bay Road and add those 13.1 hectares to 201 Muskie Bay Road. The retained lands and buildings and structures at 217 will meet all the provisions of the comprehensive zoning bylaw or would be considered legal non-complying in that sense. And approval of the application will not result in the creation of any new lots or development or site alteration at this time. That's not what I wanted. In your package on roughly page 17 of 73 is a map or air photo showing the overall parcel, the lands to be retained in the upper left-hand corner, lands to be added to with added added to, with frontage onto Georgia Bay, and the lands to be severed and to be added to is the remainder of the 13.1 hectares. The majority of the lands to be severed are environmental protection. Overall, there's some development potential on it, but very little. And what it seems to be looking at this particular time is the access way to the lands to be added to is on the lands on somebody else. There's an easement kind of thing overall. So it looks like basically just a large land swap, but not or a land movement from one parcel to the next to be added to. Zoning, none of that's being changed. We're not having any environmental protection issues. And the lands to be retained, as you can see, does have a cottage on it already. It's not going to be a tiny property, but it's certainly going to be smaller than it was in the past. It's still going to retain access onto Muskie Bay Road as required. We taken a look at the provincial policy statement, the township and the district official plans, and the township zoning bylaw, and we have no issues with that overall. We would recommend that the application as proposed 2302 for the 13.1 hectares as a lot addition be approved in accordance with the conditions that are attached to the decision sheet. Thank you.
Two letters of no objection were received from the District of Muskoka and Hydro One.
Thank you. Is there anyone from the public here today who wishes to speak to this application? Seeing none. So does any member of the committee have any questions on this application? And I will start with member Jarvis.
Thank you. Obviously, I don't think I have much in the way of complaint about this. I just a little confused with terminology. We've got lands to be added to, lands to be retained, lands to be severed. The lands that are being severed from the lands that are to be added to and the lands to be retained.
Mr. Chair, Mr. Jarvis, Community Manager Jarvis, the to be retained and to be severed on the map are one parcel at the moment.
Okay,
So the part to be severed is going to be joined to the part to be added to. That's where it's going. They're going to be one lot at the end of the day.
oh, so
and
the part that's outlined in red is going to be part of that to be added to,
Correct,
that one big hunk of property.
correct. Versus right now, the to be retained and to be severed is the one big hunk of property.
Right, so it's a trade
Yeah. Yeah.
in a way. Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you. Member Rivet.
Yeah, just one question. The second last page, it indicates that the proposed retained lot area of question will be sufficient in this case. Do we know what that answer is? It's just that it's going to be sufficient for septics and development, but it doesn't say how much it is. So.
Yeah, my apologies. That's obviously something that I should pay better attention to. And I have to go. Mr. Gilbert probably has it closer at hand. Mr. Gilbert, sorry, is the one whose property is being added to. So it's the Szymanski's property is being severed, and Mr. Gilbert is the property would be benefiting or being added to. So.
It is. Thank you, David. And that is through, it's an SR1 zone, or is that SR5? Is 1 point, how many hectares?
There is some mixed zoning going on the properties, right? There's SMSR
Yeah.
5, there's an EP5, so on and so forth. The, I believe it's all SR5 in this particular case. Okay, lands to be severed, sorry, going down to the comprehend, my mistake. The lands to be added are SR1, the lands to be severed are SR5 and EPSW. So there's a mixture of zones kind of going on all here, all within the SR zone, but 1 and 5 in that regard. And as Mr. Gilbert, thank you for pointing it out in the report on page, I'm going the wrong way. Top of page 14, the areas and the frontage and the depth of the retained is mentioned there for 217 is 1.96, as Mr. Gilbert thankfully pointed out.
Answer your question, Ms. Rita?
Thank you.
Mr. Schmidt, Member Schmidt, any questions?
No, thank you very much for the thorough report, and that makes sense to me. Thank you. Moved by Stephen Predko, seconded by Tony Schmidt. Be it resolved that the Township of Georgian Bay Committee of Adjustment hereby grant provisional approval to consent application B 23-02, excuse me, for a lot addition as shown as on Schedule A attached to this decision and subject to the following conditions. That the landowner provide a property tax certificate or correspondence from Township Financial Services indicating that all property taxes have been paid up to date with respect to the properties that is subject to this application. That the application is for a lot addition only, and that the lands to be severed being parts 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6, as shown on the attached Schedule A, be merged under the same ownership as the abutting lands, Baxter Concession 4, Part Lot 35, being parts 1 and 2, roll call 35R 17029 for 201 Muskie Bay Road. And that the section 50, that bracket 3 or 50 bracket 5 of the Planning Act to any subsequent conveyance or transaction involving a parcel of land that is subject to this consent. That a reference plan, bracket survey that is registered, be completed and the digital copy of a hard copy be filed with the Township Planning Department, or an exemption from the reference plan be received by the registrar. The registered reference plan shall conform substantially with Schedule A attached to and forming part of the decision. That pursuant to section 53 bracket 42 of the Planning Act, the certificate of consent be affixed to the deed within 2 years of giving of the notice decision. No, section 53 bracket 43 of the Planning Act requires that the transaction approval be by this consent must be carried out within 2 years of the issuance of the certificate. And finally, that all fees and distribution and disbursements, legal engineering or planning, if any, incurred by the township with respect to this application be paid by the owner in line with the most current user fee bylaw. All those in favor, please signify by raising your hand. And that motion is carried.
Thank you.
Okay. Next, back to the planning department for B 22-22.
Perfect. Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm just going to share my screen quickly. Here we are. Hopefully all members can see that. So thank you, Mr. Chair and members of committee. The subject lands are located at 213 Duffys Lane and have an area of approximately 25 hectares, a frontage of approximately 679 meters on Toronto Lake, The subject lands are developed with accessory buildings and structures that are planned to be removed. The lands have an undulating topography and are well vegetated with mature trees and natural ground cover. And surrounding uses are low density waterfront residential development and rural residential. The purpose of the consent application is to create 2 new shoreline residential lots and 1 retaining lot with frontage on Toronto Lake. Access to the lots would be from Duffys Lane, which is a private road. The location of the driveways have been identified within a site evaluation report and environmental impact study submitted in support of the proposal. 2 rights of ways are required over severed lot 1. So I've highlighted them here, and hopefully it's clear. I don't know how small it is on your screens, but there would be a right of way required here from Duffys Lane, which is this road sort of running diagonally, bisecting the lot. So over severed lot 1 in favor of the retained land. Sorry, I was moving my cursor on the wrong screen. So again, Duffys Lane is this sort of road running diagonally, bisecting the lot, and then this would be a right of way that would be required over severed lot 1 in favor of the retained lot. And a second right of way would be required over severed lot 2, shown here in green, in favor of severed lot 1. A future zoning bylaw amendment application is also proposed to rezone the majority of the shoreline residential 5 zone lands to an environmentally protected zone. And to the remaining lands sort of shown hatched would be rezoned to shoreline residential 5 with exceptions. The exceptions would permit driveways outside of the identified development areas, so to allow them in the locations that they're shown, and to recognize the proposed lot areas and frontages. And that is needed because the SR5 zone, the area and frontage requirements are as existing on the data passing of the bylaw. So the passing of the bylaw itself would establish those frontages and areas. And the final exception would be to require a 30-meter setback to Toronto Lake. Condition has been included in the consent to require that the lands be rezoned for their intended use prior to provisional consent approvals being finalized. And as noted a moment ago, a site evaluation report and environmental impact study was submitted in support of the application. The EIS contains the results of a background information review and field surveys to document the natural features such as wetlands, watercourses, potential species at risk, and significant wildlife habitat, which includes breeding birds and aquatic habitats. The report concludes that development could proceed on the proposed lots without negatively impacting the natural features or functions of the site, provided the recommendations and mitigation measures contained in the report are implemented through the approval process. The recommendations include constructions of buildings and structures and driveways in identified locations, the construction of docks outside of Type 1 fish habitat, the maintenance of natural vegetation outside of identified building areas, and the use of sediment and erosion control measures. So again, just to clarify, the hatched areas shown are the identified development envelopes in the EIS. In order to evaluate the methodologies of the assessment and verify the rationale proposed, the EIS is being peer reviewed by a third-party consultant. The peer review will be finalized prior to the zoning bylaw amendment appearing before Planning Council. Regarding policy, the PPS encourages a broad mix of housing that is compatible with rural landscapes and appropriate to the infrastructure which is planned or available. Further, the PPS states that driveways and connectivity of natural features, that diversity and connectivity of natural features in an area and the long-term ecological function and biodiversity of natural heritage systems should be maintained, restored, or where possible improved. Section F3.3.2 of the Township Official Plan requires a minimum lot area of 0.4 hectares and a lot frontage of 60 meters. Section F4 contains specific lake policies which apply to Toronto Lake. Specifically, F.4.7 requires a minimum shoreline frontage of 120 meters on Toronto Lake. The severed and retained lots would have a minimum lot area of 5.5 hectares and a minimum lot frontage of 129.7 meters, meeting those provisions. Additionally, the lake-specific policies identify that all development and new lot creation shall be based on the submission of a site evaluation report. And as noted previously, that was submitted in support of the proposal. And again, it concluded that development can proceed with no negative impacts to identify natural heritage features. The proposed consent application, again, was submitted concurrently with a rezoning application. And that would see, again, the majority of the subject lands are rezoned to a conservation zone, with the hatched areas rezoned to a shoreline residential 5 with exceptions. Therefore, as the application appears consistent with the provisions of the PPS and conforms to the township and Muskoka official plan, staff recommend approval. That concludes my presentations, and I'd be happy to answer any questions that committee may have.
Thank you, Mr. Sievert. Madam Chair, has there been any written correspondence from the public on this application?
One letter of no objection was received from Hydro One. One letter of objection was received from Alex Noverduritz. And one letter was received from the District of Muskoka recommending a deferral until a peer review of the site evaluation and environmental impact study has been completed.
Thank you. I think I see an agent here. Would you like to step forward and state your name and address for the record and turn on your microphone? I'll turn mine off.
Not very tech savvy. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, committee members. Good to be in this room again, to be honest with you. So I'm Patrick Towns. I'm a land use planner with MHBC, and I'm here representing the Ennises. I'll do my best not to repeat anything, but just to provide some background, the Ennises hired our firm to complete a due diligence for this consent some time ago. So we reviewed the policies, made sure we could support it. We've pre-consulted with the township, and that resulted in the completion of the site evaluation report and the completion of the EIS by Azimuth Environmental. Again, I won't repeat anything. I don't know, Ms. Levesque, do you have the presentation handy? If you could go just straight to slide 6, that would be helpful from my end. And maybe in the meantime, I'll speak to the comments that were received on the application. We did review the district comments that were received yesterday. The comments do recommend a deferral, but there's a caveat in there as well. If the decision is made that the peer review be covered off in the provisional conditions of consent. And through that, the townships recommended 2 specific provisions that would result in some assurity that those will be addressed. So we still need to complete the zoning bylaw amendment, which will be processed at a later date. And there's also a consent agreement that's required to be implemented. That consent agreement will actually implement the recommendations of the original environmental report and the peer review comments as well. So that will be updated. So there's 2 conditions to cover off, and that's part of the recommendation to approve it today. I will note, just as an update, Azimuth had a call with Hutchison Environmental yesterday. I was on the call and Mr. Ennis was on the call as well. They're very close to addressing the comments. They're minor in nature for the most part, but we're in the process of completing that peer review response and coming to an agreement. So just an update for committee in that regard. So thank you for this slide. So what's really occurred here through the environmental review process is wetland pockets were established on the property, and everything was reviewed in terms of species at risk and significant wildlife habitat impacts to the shoreline. And what's been carved out on the property are building envelopes, which are shown in the lighter gray color on your screen. They're at least 30 meters back from the shoreline. That's what the specific zoning requires on this property, the SR 5-1. There's specific zoning to require 30-meter setback from the typical 20-meter setback. So out of all the work that's been done, these areas have been established. And what comes out of the EIS is more of a protection of the remainder of the property. I'd say up to 90% or maybe more will be protected in terms of an EP zone. The only thing that will be permitted in that EP zone eventually is the driveways to simply access those building envelopes. If you could just go to the next slide. Just an operative policy in the official plan. Toronto Lake New lots are required to have 120 meters of frontage. So that's the operative policy when evaluating new lot creation on this Toronto Lake. So 3 lots, more than 3 lots cannot be created in this case. So that's an important policy to consider. And perhaps just to slide 9. Sorry for jumping around, but you'll notice that the envelopes on the proposed zoning amendment, which is to be considered by council at a future date, don't exactly line up with the principal building envelope shown on the previous slide. So the dwelling itself will have to be, again, 30 meters back. So that's essentially the bulbs, I'll call it, on this image. But what the zoning also includes, if the owners want to have a small shed or storage area for life jackets, that would be permitted within the 30 meter. But just to be clear, the principal dwelling must be located 30 meters back in this case. And that will all be dealt with through the future zoning bylaw amendment application. So just next slide, please. 3 main points I just wanted to finish with. The site's been well studied. The resulting studies have resulted in specific building envelopes. Point 2, the remainder of the property will be protected through zoning in the future. So there's going to be no development on the property other than the areas identified here. And 3, the OP permits new lot creation on Toronto Lake that have at least 120 meters of frontage, and that's maintained here. The smallest lot has a frontage of 129 meters. So in conclusion, we agree with the recommendation. We agree with the comments provided by the district in that there's 2 conditions to deal with the completion of the peer review. The council will see this again through the zoning bylaw amendment application, and staff will be preparing the consent agreement that implements the findings of the peer review. So by giving provisional consent, it's not a final approval today, but those will be dealt with through the process. And yeah, that concludes my presentation. Available to answer any questions.
Check if there's anybody on live Zoom who'd like to comment on this. Shell, I think we see your hand up. Oh, no, it's my hand. But, do you have any further comments you'd like to make to this application?
No, sorry, I raised my hand in error.
That's all right. Thank you. Anybody else? Seeing none in person or on Zoom. We will close this application to the public, and we'll turn it over to the committee for any questions. And we will start with member Predko.
Thank you, Chair. So I just have a couple, and the first one is to do with the letter of objection from the neighbor. I know there's no detail in the actual submission. Do we know what the neighbor's objection is to this proposal?
Through you, Mr. Chair, to Councillor Predko, I did try calling the, just given the limited timeline between when we received it and the meeting date, I did try to call the objecting neighbor on 2 occasions and didn't manage to connect with them. So unfortunately, I have no further details on what the nature of their objection was.
Okay, thank you. And then do we today, when we're looking at this resolution, should we be considering adding provisions for the conditions that would satisfy the provincial or the Muskoka report, or is that something that we will leave until it comes back for consideration in the future as they go through zoning? And I can leave that with Mr. Smith.
If I may, Mr. Chair, so I Councillor Predko, to put you at ease, the condition, there's a condition in the provisional consent approval to require, it's would be an agreement with the township under section 5126 of the Planning Act, and it would require the owner to enter into an agreement with the township to implement the recommendations of the completed environmental impact study, as well as the future finalized version of the peer review report. So
Okay.
that's in there now, and they would then, once that report has been finalized, it's had a chance to go to planning council for consideration of the zoning, then the owner would go through the process of entering into that agreement with the township.
Okay.
So to put you at ease, it is in there currently as a condition of provisional consent approval.
And that's paragraph number 8 in the in the resolution. And then my last question is maybe just on the land use. So I know that for severing, you can sever up to 2 lots. It looks like the landowner still owns a large portion of the land around Toronto Lake. If they decide to sever again in the future, and this is an arduous process, I can understand they've been going through it for a long time, but if they go to sever again, are they allowed 2 severances from the remaining lot, or and I'm just wondering how that would compare to, as a plan of subdivision if they went to that route all at one time.
Thank you, and through you, Mr. Chair. The 3 lots that are proposed through this application wouldn't have the frontage to sever further. So the official plan requires a minimum of 120 meters of frontage on Toronto Lake to be eligible to sever. And none of the lots have 240 meters. So none of the lots would meet the official plan requirements to sever further. So this is sort of what we would expect. This is sort of the end result, the maximum density they would be permitted.
Thank you. That's all of my questions.
Mr. Chair, if I may.
Certainly, Mr. Smith.
We're going to talk, so 2 things. Number 1 is an official plan policy is an official plan policy. Everything in the Planning Act or in township policy or documents can be applied to amend. But right now, as Curtis pointed out, that those are the rules, right? Kind of thing. Whether or not they're the same rules 5 years from now, I don't know, right? And I don't think any of us know for sure. What I'm saying is, yes, people can apply to amend. They provide a justification. The justification for official plan amendments go to Planning Council to see whether or not it's appropriate for the circumstances. So, is it a no? Yeah, right now under the planning policies, yeah, it's a no. You can't do that because it doesn't meet the policies. Can you apply to amend? Like every single zoning amendment, minor variance amendment, official plan amendment, they can ask for that, right? So we know that exists. Number 2 is talking to the EIS. What we look for from the planning department is that there is a substantial agreement between our peer reviewers and the consulting firm they're doing the work that yes, there's development potential overall. Where we get down to at the end of the day happens to be at times some little minor kind of things of here and there, as opposed to no, this can't go forward at all. And that's where they end up kind of doing a little bit of back and forth at the end just to fine tune a couple things, as opposed to saying, if we had an outright no on the front end, your EIS is insufficient. You didn't do a good job. You didn't justify, then obviously we wouldn't be there. So here where we're at in that process is that small little fine tuning at the end that the district is pointing out and that we will continue to look at, as Curtis pointed out.
Thank you, Mr. Smith. Does that answer your questions? Member Rivet, any questions?
Yes, thank you. My question is in regard to the access in the road, Duffys Lane. Is Duffys Lane a municipal road or a private road?
Thank you, through you, Mr. Chair. Duffys Lane is a private road. It presently has an easement over it to provide access to the existing lot, and then through the severance would be extended to these lots. So all of these lots, should they be created, would have a right to utilize Duffys Lane to get to their respective driveways.
So my question is, will that road be a deeded easement over those 3 lots? Because it allows for it allows to access to the south end of the lake as well. So is it a deeded access road as we see it on those two lots?
Yes, thank you. Through you, Mr. Chair. It presently has a right of way over it to provide access. You know, the right of way was granted sometime in the past, and you know, planning staff don't have a list of who has access over it, but there is presently a right of way that provides access, presumably to a number of adjacent residents, including the subject lands, obviously. So,
Or did you have your hand up? Did you want to add something to that?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just through you. Yeah, that's correct. There's an existing easement. No access will be affected to any other properties down the road on Duffys Lane. The only thing being added is simply the easements to allow legal access over each of the proposed lots to get to the new building envelopes. So there is an existing easement over Duffys Lane.
If I may, Mr. Chair, so as pointed out, there's an existing lot there now. Before it's being subdivided, that lot has grants easements to others to cross it and has easements itself in order to move on. When we subdivide, those easements move on Duffys Lane with the new parcels themselves. They are automatically part of the title, granting them access to the Duffys Lane. So that part comes automatically within how the deeds are created and the existing permissions for the easement. So part of it is automatic.
Right.
Okay, the only funky thing about this, if you can call it that, is that we are going to create a couple of new easements for the driveways, but access to Duffys Lane continues on. Even if we were to create, let's say 5, 6, 7 lots, each of those would automatically get access to the private roadway, or sorry, to the easement that they would have in other locations for private roads.
So my question is, with these new lots created, now they're available for sale, is it possible that seller lot 1 could decide, that's it, I don't want anybody coming through my
No,
lot?
no, the easement that's currently on the big property gets transferred
Thanks.
100% to the new one, and their obligations are the same as the initial owners, the Ennis family.
Thank you. My second question maybe has more to do with the bylaws. I see that there's a camp and there's trailers and decks attached to them. My understanding is no one can live in trailers. You can have one on your lot if there's a principal dwelling for storage. So why are these trailers back there, people living in them when they're not permitted without a principal dwelling? I just want to know, has anyone addressed that? And if it is non-conforming, I believe that you should be conforming before development is allowed to continue, especially when you have people complaining about new development. If there's people using the property the way they're not supposed to be using it, maybe that's why you're getting some pushback, because trailers with decks are not allowed. That's my understanding. So I would just like to know if there wasn't an inspection, is anyone looking at enforcement?
Through you, Mr. Chair, thank you for the question. They will be removed through this process, and you're correct. Prior to the actual lots being created, the new lots have to comply with the zoning bylaw. So that would be dealt with through the zoning bylaw amendment application. But the owners have committed to removing those structures, and they've been there for some amount of time. They're not lived in year round or stayed in, but of course, yeah. Just to directly answer your question, everything will have to comply before those lots are created.
I would like to see a provision that the lot be compliant, that the use of the lot be compliant before approval is granted. I want to make sure that those if they're not supposed to be there, they need to be gone.
Through you, Mr. Chair, I may go to staff after this, but the provision is included to complete the zoning bylaw amendment application. So during that process, there's the ability to legalize or make sure everything complies with the bylaw, but I'll let staff perhaps elaborate on that.
yeah, and through you, Mr. Chair, I think I would also note that, you know, enforcement, you know, can be undertaken through bylaw and, you know, isn't necessarily, it might not necessarily be the best approach to tie it to the approval of the applications. Because if it's deemed that those structures, you know, if this were not to proceed and the structures weren't to be removed, if, you know, if they were deemed to not conform to some provisions of the bylaw, we have mechanisms to deal with that through the bylaw and enforcement process. So, you know, I would just wanted to put that out there for committee's consideration.
Thank you, Mr. Trigger. Mr. Smith, you have your hand up.
All right, Mr. Chair, you know, the whole concept of legal non-conforming, all the rest of it applies to any kind of thing, and we have cannot say to you today, you know, about where those buildings sit in relationship to how long the trailer's been there, whether or not the trailer had been replaced with a new one, and there was one back there with a hung camp in the forties kind of thing, is that there's a whole bunch of legal things wrapped up in this. What I do hear from the Ennis and you know, that moving forward is that the intent here is for people to build cottages. They're expensive lots, right? Kind of thing. And that is the, you know, the intent of the planning department to move forward with them and to be in the township building department to move forward on that kind of concept, not for trailers and all the rest of it. But even if the trailer were to remain on the lot, we would still have the issue of trying to determine whether or not it has legal non-conforming status before we remove it in terms of a legal or condition kind of thing. As Curtis mentioned, we'll take a look again at the zoning bylaw and we'll see whether or not there is a proper requirement to put a holding or something on that, but I'm not going to commit to that at this time either for the trailer and for the deck in that matter, without understanding where it sits from a legal perspective. And we don't have that information available today. In terms of whether or not it should be removed, we know that both the planning department and bylaw enforcement operate on a complaint basis kind of thing, as opposed to going out and finding problems. You know what I mean? We have plenty of problems out there kind of thing. So we work on a complaint basis in that regards. Otherwise, we don't have enough staff to deal with going out to properties and making sure people are doing everything everywhere. I hear your comment, and I certainly understand that. I think from the applicants and from the planning department that these lots are intended for cottages, which is why we did all the work on the EISs and everything else and driveways and everything else in order to move forward with that kind of development. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Smith. Anything else, Ms. Rivet? Member Schmidt.
With reviewing the property sizes and the layout of Toronto Lake, this certainly seems like it's going to be a net improvement. The removal of the trailers and converting it to cottage properties. A lot of effort's been put into the environmental standpoint, creating the building envelopes, 30 meter setbacks. It all makes perfect planning sense to me. I support this.
Thank you, Member Schmidt. Member Jarvis, any comments?
Yeah, couple of follow-ups to comments made by members Predco, Predco. One is the letter opposing this severance with no details. I gather, Curtis, that you did make attempts to contact this chap. Did you send him an email or did you try to contact him by phone?
I tried contacting him by phone, just given the, but the small amount of time. It was my hope that I would get in touch with him. Hindsight being what it is, I do wish I sent him an email right away. I thought we would be able to connect prior to the meeting, but unfortunately that didn't happen.
Does this chap still have an opportunity? I see we're revisiting this for further consent in May anyway at Committee of Adjustment. And then there's also Planning Council, I think, has to deal with it too. Will this chap be able to present his opposition at any of those meetings?
Yeah, through you, Mr. Chair. My intention is to follow up with the objector by email following this meeting. There will be another public meeting for the zoning bylaw amendment application. They would have a chance to object again. As a condition of provisional consent approval, the zoning bylaw amendment, the proposed zoning bylaw amendment application will need to be approved. And so because of that, they'll have basically a chance to, almost like a redo, they'll have a chance to comment again in more detail what their specific issues are with the proposal.
Okay, and then, so thank you very much. Appreciate that. My other comment is with regards to a note that was made about further severance of the lots and the inability to do so because current bylaws indicating how much frontage is required. And I see the retained lot has a frontage of 386 meters. That far exceeds the 240 that was noted. Is that still a possibility then, or is that, I know that water, that shoreline there, I think is beyond use because it is, I think it'd be all fish habitat or sensitive the EIS and not be able to be developed, but what is the situation there?
Yeah, through you, Mr. Chair, to Councillor Jarvis. I guess I suppose I was a bit, maybe it was a bit of a misspeak on my part when I said the lots didn't have 240. I suppose what I would say to that question was the bay on the retained land is largely type 1 fish habitat and consists of wetlands. And we have sort of a number of other requirements other than simply the frontage requirement, which is again 120 meters. The policies of the Muskoka official plan require us to consider the quality of the shoreline and when I say quality, I guess I mean the constraints that are present on the shoreline that may necessitate larger frontages. So given that there's really no other building envelope available on the retained lands and the majority of the shoreline consists of wetlands and type 1 fish habitat, staff likely would not support a further application to sever the retained lawn.
Thank you. Then one last question, if you don't mind, and that's with regards, again, I think I'm going to be seeking clarification, just renewed clarification. It is noted that in essence, we're sort of consenting pending the peer review of the environmental work done. And that is, just to be clear, that is what we're doing here, correct?
Yeah, through you, Mr. Chair. So essentially what the applicants would get should committee choose to approve the application would be their provisional consent approval. So that's approval of the consent subject to a list of criteria. And within that list is a requirement for them to enter to an agreement with the township to implement the EIS and the final peer review comments. So they couldn't finalize the consent until the final peer review comments have been received. And the zoning bylaw amendment has been approved. So from that perspective, what we're doing is sort of just getting, because there's two applications, two committees, they're seeking their consent approval now with all the checks and balances to allow them to essentially start fulfilling conditions should the planning council choose to approve the zoning bylaw amendment.
Thank you very much.
Mr. Smith, I see your hand up.
Yeah, just to, add a little bit to Curtis's. We certainly accept, we sent out applications, we sent out notices to people. This one gentleman replied saying have an objection. We do believe it's on their onus to say about what, right? Which is what we tried to do, within the time frame that we had. And as Curtis mentioned, this individual will get a notice again for zoning, and hopefully at that point in time, they will have, if they wish to continue on with the discussion with the planning council, they will provide something substantive to that group to discuss. Speculation on severances in 2035 is a bad idea. 2040 is a bad idea, right? All we can tell you today is that here's what's the information in front of you and the policies that we reviewed it against. If things change in the future, then that committee of adjustment, that council will review it under the policies at that time. As I mentioned, the other thing is we would not have brought forward, I think, the application considering the EIS if we didn't believe that they had substantive work done. There has been a peer review done, okay? It's just, again, the fine tuning on that, and we would not have brought it forward to you if we didn't think that we had a document and something like that that was that addressed the issues of the district and the township. So thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Smith. All right, I'm closed the question period and there's two resolutions. Big ones. All right. Just okay. So this is moved by member Predko, seconded by member Schmidt. Be it resolved that the Township of Georgian Bay Committee of Adjustments hereby grant provisional approval of consent application B 22-22A for the creation of two new waterfront lots and associated easements subject to the following conditions. That the owner pay the balance of any outstanding taxes as of date of the application of the transfer / deed with respect to the property that is the subject of this application shall be made to the treasurer of the Township of Georgian Bay. That this decision applies only to the severance lot number 1 and to the easement in favor of lot 2 as indicated in Schedule A attached to and forming part of this decision. The lot and easement shall be substantially conformed with Schedule A. Number 3, that the owner enter into an agreement with the township if deemed necessary by the township to satisfy the requirements, financial or otherwise, of the township, which may include but shall not limit to the provisions of road, installation of services, facilities, drainage, and the timing and payment of a development charge. That a reference plan survey that is registered be completed and a digital copy and a hard copy be filed with the Township Planning Department, or an exemption from the reference plan be received from the registrar. That pursuant to sections 53(42) of the Planning Act, the certificate of consent be affixed to the deed within 2 years of giving the notice of decision. Note section 53(43) of the Planning Act requires that the transaction approved by this consent must be carried out within 2 years of the issuance of the certificate, stamping of the deed. Number 6, that the clerk of the township provide written confirmation that the zoning bylaw amendment, if required by the planning department, is in force and effect to rezone a portion of the subject lands from SR5 zone to an environmental protection zone to recognize the frontage and the area to be severed and retained lands, and to require a 30-meter front yard setback for non-shoreline structures. That the owner pay 5% in lieu of parkland dedication for the severed lands in accordance with section 51(1) of the Planning Act and the Township of Georgian Bay bylaw number 88-74. The township shall retain an appraiser at the owner's expense to prepare the appraisal. That the owner enter into an agreement with the township if deemed necessary by the Township Planning Department in accordance with section 51(26) of the Planning Act to implement the recommendation of the site evaluation report and environmental impact study prepared by Azimuth Environmental Consulting, Inc., dated December 2022, the peer review and the peer review's response. All those in favor, please indicate by raising your hand. Thank you. That is carried. Hang on, I got a whole other page here.
Thank you very much.
So, and this one is moved by member Rivet and seconded by member Predko. Be it resolved that the Township of Georgian Bay Committee of Adjustment hereby grant provisional approval to consent application B 22-22B for the creation of 2 new waterfront lots and associated easements subject to the following conditions. That the owner pay the balance of any outstanding taxes as of the date of the certification of the transfer or the deed with respect to the property that is subject to the application shall be made to the treasurer of the Township of Georgian Bay. That this decision applies only to the severance of lot 2 and an easement in favor of retained as indicated on Schedule A, attached to and forming part of this decision. The lot and easement shall substantially conform with Schedule A. That the owner enter into an agreement with the township, if deemed necessary by the township, to satisfy all the requirements, financial or otherwise, of the township, which may include, but not limited to, the provision of roads, installation of services, facilities, drainage, and timing and payment of a development charge. That the reference plan survey that is registered be completed and a digital copy and a hard copy be filed with the Township Planning Department, or an exemption from the reference plan be received from the registrar.
That pursuant to section 53(42) of the Planning Act, the certificate of consent be affixed to the deed within 2 years of giving notice of decision. Note that section 53(43) of the Planning Act requires that the transaction approved by this consent must be carried out within 2 years of the issuance of certificate. 6, that the clerk of the township provide written confirmation that a zoning bylaw amendment, if required by the planning department, is in force and effect to rezone a portion of the subject lands from a SR5 zone to an environmental protection zone to recognize the frontage and the area of the severed and retained lands and to require a 30-meter front yard setback for non-shoreline structures. 7, that the owner pay 5% in lieu of parkland dedication for the severed lands in accordance with section 51(1) of the Planning Act and the Township of Georgian Bay bylaw number 88-74. The township shall retain an appraiser at the owner's expense to prepare the appraisal. And finally, that the owner enter an agreement with the township if deemed necessary by the township planning department in accordance with section 51-26 of the Planning Act to implement the recommendation of the site evaluation report and the environmental impact study prepared by Azimuth Environmental Consulting dated December 2022, the peer review and the peer review response. All those in favor, please indicate by raising your hand. Thank you. That is carried. Thank you. Okay, our next application is A22-23 for 855 Kings Farm Road. To the planner, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, members of the committee, everyone online and here today. My name is Jeff Kratke. I am a registered professional planner employed by the Township of Georgian Bay. And I am appearing here today before you regarding minor variance application A22-23. May I share my screen, Mr. Chair? The owner of the subject property is Ian Gislason. The property is located approximately at, not approximately, Mr. Chairman, the property is located at 855 Kings Farm Road in the Township of Georgian Bay. And it fronts on Little Go Home Bay, which is a part of the Trent Severn Waterway. The key map shows the approximate location of the property. The proposed development is to vary the maximum width of a boat port in table 4.2 of subsection 4.1.13.1b of the zoning bylaw, where a minimum lot frontage is greater than or equal to 45 meters, but less than 61 meters. And the variance would be from 8.7 meters to 9.8 meters. The effect of the application would be to permit a boathouse, a boat port, subject to the appropriate provincial and or federal approvals, a ramp, a dock, as shown in the most recent drawings prepared by the applicant and attached to my report. The property is located on Little Go Home Bay, as I mentioned, and it's very large. It's approximately 4.73 hectares, but it's essentially a reverse pie backing onto the Little Go Home Bay. So the area along the shoreline is limited. The site visit was conducted on March 27th. However, snow cover was still largely in effect, and so it was difficult to tell much other than the topography of the property is generally flat to the west with a greater slope to the east, but all the slopes are up and away from Little Go Home Bay. The property itself is within the waterfront area and the shoreline residential of the district official plans, township official plan, and the township zoning bylaw. Generally speaking, the surrounding lands are similarly zoned and designated, with the exception of a number of provincially significant wetlands in the area, the nearest of which is approximately 120 meters from the proposed port to the north and west. According to my review of the provincial policy statement, the application would be consistent with the provincial policy statement. There are 4 tests of minor variances set out by the Planning Act for the committee to consider, and the application must pass all 4 of those tests. The first test is the general intent of the official plan. In this case, of course, we have 2 official plans, the upper tier, the district municipality of Muskoka, and the lower tier, the township itself. In both cases, the policy review that's outlined in my report suggests to me that the proposed development meets the general intent and purpose of the official plans. The second test is the general intent and purpose of the zoning bylaw. And in this regard, the zoning bylaw clearly provides much more detail regarding boat ports and boat houses and the like. And it is there that this limitation of 8.7 meters arises. And again, if the lot were more typically rectangular shaped, this would not be an application that would be needed. However, given the reversed pie shape of the property, their water frontage is just below the limit that they would require no variance for. And as such, they are seeking a 1.1 meter variance. It's my professional planning opinion that there is no significant variance from the general intent and purpose of the bylaw by granting this variance. The test of whether a variance is minor or not is certainly much more difficult to deliberate on and truly requires that deliberation and thought. And when I look to the surrounding lands and I see the existing boat houses and boat ports on those surrounding properties, and the importance in the official plans of balancing the enjoyment of the natural environment for shoreline recreational purposes versus the protection of the natural environment, it is my planning opinion that this certainly is a minor variance. Lastly, the question of whether or not the variance is a desirable, appropriate land development for the property is again one that is requiring deliberation. And once again, I take a great deal of regard from the existing use of the shoreline in the area. And so it is my opinion that the application does meet all 4 of the tests under the Planning Act for this minor variance. And therefore, I have recommended that the Committee of Adjustment for the Township of Georgian Bay hereby approves minor variance application A2223 for the purpose of varying the maximum width of a boat port from 8.7 meters to 9.8 meters for the property, having the effect of allowing the development of the boat port and related dock and ramp, subject to the following conditions. Number 1, that the owner provide a property tax certificate or correspondence from the Township Financial Services indicating that all property taxes have been paid up to date with respect to the property that is subject of this decision. 2, that the decision applies only to the boat port, dock, and ramp as indicated on schedules A, B, C, D, and E, attached to and forming part of this decision, which were originally attached to my report, and shall not be misconstrued to indirectly approve any other variances. And 3, that this decision expires 3 years from the date of the decision if the building permits have not been issued for the development.
Thank you, Mr. Kratky. Madam Chair, has there been any written correspondence on this?
One letter of support was received from Don Young.
Thank you. Not seeing the applicant here. Are they online? And if so, would they like to add anything to the comments or made by our planner? I see Kevin Halliday. The agent for this application. I believe you're on mute, sir.
Sorry, good day, Mr. Chairman. Yes, I did the design, the drawings for the client, and I'm his agent in this application.
Thank you. Is there anything you'd like to add to the planner's comments?
No, not at all. He's covered the case perfectly. Thank you.
All right, thank you. Any other member of the public that would like to speak to this application? Seeing none, I'll close the public portion and turn it over to the committee for any questions, and I will start with member Rivet.
I have no questions or concerns. I think the report was very well presented. It answered all my questions. Thank you.
Thank you. Member Schmidt.
I was just going through my notes because it was like deja vu for, I think it was application 22-20 for the next door. So I certainly feel if we supported next door, it's virtually the very similar application, and I support this.
Thank you. Member Jarvis.
Again, just some points of clarification for our planner. As it currently stands with the frontage that they have, they would be allowed a boat port that is 8.7 meters in width. Is that correct?
Through you, Mr. Chair? Yes.
Okay, so they're seeking that additional, was it 0.9 meters?
Through you, Mr. Chair, 1.1 meters.
1.1, sorry, 1.1 year, right? My math's terrible. Okay. Yeah, and then I presume that as usual, the GIS is from the district is not exactly accurate. Would that be a good assessment? I'm just trying to figure out, I'm looking at the GIS map from the GeoHub rather. It doesn't give us the exact property lines on that map, but you do in I believe the survey does, right?
Through you, Mr. Chair, yes. And in my brief period of time here at the township, I have to say that I've seen some instances where the GIS property boundary layer is right bang on.
Yeah.
With the survey plan that we're seeing. In some cases, it's slightly off. In this case, honestly, it is very off, and we have brought this to the attention of the district in the hopes that the property layer can be repaired. When I visited the site, that was one of my main concerns, and I did establish that to my viewing of the property on the site, and there was clear land near the water's edge, that the survey monuments would appear to support the plan that we're seeing and not the mapping from
GeoHub.
And so I was very confident that the natural features seem to be correct on the GIS. The buildings seem to be correct on the GIS. It seems that the property fabric needs to be pulled essentially southward and a little eastward to actually line up with something else.
That would be, yeah. It almost like on the geo, it looks like we're looking at two lots here as opposed to one. Just
And
put-
it did cause me some confusion at the beginning.
Okay, I think I have no issue with this specifically. I think we're gonna be careful that if in future, as a committee and just generally, just because everybody else has got something on their property doesn't mean everybody else has to have something on their property. And we gotta be careful, or else we're gonna end up with a lot of large, not necessarily here, but a lot of large boathouses or cottages on properties all over the place. However, having said all that, thank you very much, planner.
Thank you, Mr. Jarvis. Mr. Predko, any comments?
Thank you, Chair. Just, I'm just gonna actually, I was gonna make the same comment about the EIS GeoHub map that Councillor Jarvis did, and the request maybe in the future, and this is up to Mr. Smith, but in the reports, is it possible to put like a yellow line where it's supposed to be so that we're not looking at where the GIS is telling us to look, but where we're actually supposed to be looking? And I know lots of places this is accurate, but it did, until you go to the survey, this was a little bit confusing as to which property we were looking at. I had read that it was a reverse pie, but it didn't look like a reverse pie from the arrow on the map. So that would be my only request, but otherwise I think given the shape of this property, there's very little that they could really do to build a boat port and dock that didn't offend our bylaws and be looking for a minor variance. So I think they've probably done as well as they can do.
Thank you, Member Predko. I just have a question. I was on site and I recognized that the neighbor to the left, we had an application for a long ramp and dock. And I'm curious, does this applicant feel that he has depth to put his boat port close enough to shore without asking for a great extension out into the water?
Through you, Mr. Chair, to you, Mr. Chair. As far as my understanding, yes, the answer is they believe that they can sufficiently use the boat port they have proposed and actually maintain setbacks from the imaginary projection of the lot lines into the water. But certainly if the applicant's agent, Mr. Holliday, who's online, has further details, I encourage him to add those.
Yes, Mr. Chair, I wouldn't add to that, no. My only comment is that when we did the design, it started well over a year ago in conjunction with the neighbour because there was one joint OLS map. The neighbour had a problem with shallow water, which Mr. Gislason does not have. What he has is a very, very short straight line shoreline. If the water were raised a meter, he'd have no problem because it's shallow further up from the water's edge. Where he wants to put the boat port now is exactly where he has in the past had a floating dock, and there's ample depth in that location for motors. And so that is the location, but it was always premised on getting the side yard setbacks from that rather awkward projected property lines.
Thank you, Mr. Halliday, because it's a lovely piece of property and it really is quite a reverse pie and lots of construction going on there. So thank you for that clarity. There's no other comments. I will read the motion.
Chair, if I may
Sorry.
just quickly.
I see your hand up there.
Yeah,
Mr.
that's
Smith.
fine. Member Predko, Councillor Predko, be happy if Township Council wanted to support monies to fix a ugly at times GeoHub mapping, and I did come from a previous municipality where they had spent taxpayer monies to improve that mapping, considering how it's used and used at times inappropriately because of those kind of problems, leading to questions and problems and concerns and arguments and probably possibly even fights between neighbors when they take a look at things as opposed to the surveys. And the township has certainly relied upon the actual surveys for a number of years to provide you and to ourselves with information that is accurate and a reflection of that. And you can see how it changed. Probably, when you took a look at it, probably may have changed your view on certain things, or at least certainly clarified it. But mapping has been bane of my existence, at least to here, and that is nobody's fault other than the way the data comes from Terranet. Okay, and I'm not too sure if there's a disclaimer on the website or not. These are not surveys, so we try to use them to some effect. The second one, and you know, Mr. Holiday pointed out, is it's interesting how quickly the shorelines vary, not just in terms of their substrate materials at the thing, but depths and materials within that, about how quickly it seems to change from one place being so shallow as it shows up to the other one having sufficient depth, and you're kind of going, geez, that's within what, 100 meters, 150 meters of one to the other, and therefore begging in some respects approaches that are as unique to the property as they are to the environment. So I think that's where we begin to say, but I would overall kind of go, geez, and that close, right? And it's like, it seems to be the answer to be yes. So thank you.
Mr. Jarvis.
Just one further comment with regards to the survey. I observe that there's a shore road allowance that would appear to be well offshore. I presume that was established when water levels were significantly different, because I believe the water levels here are controlled. I know that we have no control over how shore road allowances are established, when they were established, and what's to be done with them. I know that in other areas, shore road allowances are purchased as part of development requirements on other shorelines. Is there any ability, and I'm hoping there isn't, in this case, for this owner to purchase this shore road allowance, considering where it is?
I'll let Sydney speak to it, maybe no, a little bit too, but the answer is when the shore road allowance is land, yes. When the shore road allowance goes underwater, no, is my understanding. Okay.
That would make sense, and okay, that's good.
Does that answer your question, Member
Yes,
Jarvis?
thank you.
All right, I'll read the resolution. It's moved by Member Predko, seconded by Member Rivet. Be it resolved that the Committee of Adjustment for the Township of Georgian Bay hereby approves minor variance A 22-223 for the purpose of varying the maximum width of a boat port from 8.7 meters to 9.8 meters for the property having effect of allowing the development of a boat port and related dock ramps subject to the following conditions. That the owner provide a property tax certificate or correspondence from Township Financial Services indicating that all property taxes have been paid up to date with respect to the property that is subject to this decision. That this decision applies only to the boat port, dock, and ramp as indicated on schedules A, B, C, D, and E attached to and forming part of this decision, and shall not be misconstrued or indirectly approved any other variance. And that this decision expires 3 years from the date of decision if building permits have not been issued for the development. All those in favor, please raise their hand. That is carried. And to our final application for A 2304 to the Planning Department.
Perfect. Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm just sharing my screen quickly. Hopefully committee can see that. So thank you, Mr. Chair, members of committee. The subject lands are located at 503 Berwick Road and have an area of approximately 4,111 square meters with 81 meters of frontage on 6 Mile Lake. The subject lands are currently developed with a single detached dwelling, which is under construction to permit a second-story addition, a shed, detached garage, sleeping cabin, privy, and dock, and are generally well vegetated with mature trees and natural ground cover. Surrounding uses include low-density shoreline residential and open space. The lot is designated waterfront and waterfront area within the township and Muskoka official plans respectively, and zoned 6 Mile Lake Residential, SR6. On August 31st, 2022, the building department issued a building permit for the construction of a 29.46 square meter second-story addition. And sorry, that 29.46 meter is gross floor area. To the existing legal non-complying dwelling in accordance with section 4.11 of the zoning bylaw. Section 4.11 permits the expansion of existing non-complying dwellings, but limits the gross floor area to a maximum of 25% of the area of the existing structure. The area of the addition granted through the 2011 building permit can be seen hatched in green here on the dwelling. So for context, again, this is the existing one-story dwelling. The location of the dwelling is here in green. On screen is the proposed floor plan and building elevations. Note that the area shown hatched in green again here. So this is the second story addition that was approved to the 2022 building permit. What has already been approved. The areas shown in gray were also approved through the building permit, but are presently shown as inaccessible to maintain that 25% increase to GFA. The purpose of this application is to permit the owner to increase the GFA by opening up these existing internal areas shown in gray. This change would increase the GFA from 25% of the area of the existing structure to 36%. However, the internal size of the addition would remain the same. And I just wanted to apologize to committee. I realize that may not have been abundantly clear in my report. I didn't have access to the original building permit drawing. So at the time that I wrote it, so I just wanted, I didn't want to mislead committee. I have had a chance since to review both sets of drawings and confirm that nothing else is changing. The plans are literally exactly the same. It's just opening up this internal, these two internal spaces shown here as they're currently shown as inaccessible attic space. Regarding the 4 tests of a minor variance, the proposed single detached dwelling is a permitted use in both the township and Muskoka official plans, and staff are of the opinion that the application maintains the general intent of the township and Muskoka official plans. A review of the zoning bylaw indicates that the proposed development complies with all applicable provisions of the bylaw, with the exception of the requested increase to gross floor area. As a result, staff are of the opinion that the application maintains the general intent of the township of Georgian Bay zoning bylaw. Regarding the minor variance being desirable, the proposed development represents a modest increase to the overall existing GFA and would be located wholly within the existing addition approved through the 2020 building permit. As a result, planning staff are of the opinion that the proposed minor variance is appropriate and desirable for development of the subject lands. Lastly, as the applicant is only seeking to increase the permitted GFA by 13.08 meters above what is permitted through their building permit, staff is of the opinion that the proposal is minor. Therefore, staff recommend that the application be approved as the proposal appears consistent with the provisions of the PPS and meets the 4 tests of a minor variance. That concludes my presentation. I'd be happy to answer any questions that committee may have.
Thank you, Mr. Siebert. Madam Secretary, has there been any written correspondence received on this application?
1 letter of support was received from Bruce Hanson.
Thank you. Is there anybody in the representing the applicant that would like to add any comments from that of the planner? Flow design, maybe?
I'm the owner. I can speak if Flo isn't able to.
I think she just got her mute off, but
Okay.
go ahead. Victoria, did you want to speak to this? Or?
Good morning, everybody. I think this one is pretty straightforward, but if anybody has any questions, I'm here to answer. And I think Michelle, the owner, did have some comments, but I'm here to answer any questions if I'm here.
Thank you. Michelle, did you like to add something to this, the comments?
I can just respond to if there's questions or concerns.
Okay, fair enough.
Seeing no other members of the public, we will close the public session and turn this over to the committee for questions, and I will start with Member Schmidt.
Little bit confused, just wanted to get some clarification. I actually did a site visit there today. So is this an addition to what is already addition there? It looks like there's a two-story addition currently on the back, and I just wanted to get clarification. Is it different from what's already sort of there now? Okay. I wonder if we could bring up that the one page with the two tones of green. Just wanted to.
Absolutely. Allow me to share my screen quickly, Mr. Chair, and I will attempt to answer that question. So essentially what you see here on the screen, all of this was approved through the 2022 building permit. This is again the second floor of the proposed dwelling, which is currently under construction. And I believe they're pretty far along in that process. Siding's on, and they will potentially be just working on interior finishes. Essentially, this application would just be allowing the owner to open up these two areas shown on the screen and allow them to increase their gross floor area to 36%. I believe this would be a closet, and this would be sort of a like a living room for the applicant's family to hang out in. So no, essentially what you saw on site, Councillor Smith, would be exactly what it would remain the exact same.
If I can add, if that's appropriate, I'm the owner.
Go ahead.
So just to clarify the comment that Curtis made in his presentation. So because we are within 10 meters of the lake, the original structure has been on the lake for 70 years. We are restricted to a 25% gross floor area increase. We're 6.7 meters. If we were beyond 10, we would have 40%. So the only way to build the addition was this second floor, and the only cost-effective way to build it was sitting on the structure below. So, but in order to keep under the 25%, all of this area had to be excluded as living space under the GFA restrictions on 6 Mile. So we wanted to build what we could build and do it affordably. And so that was what we did. And then this application is now to say we would like a very modest increase to allow us to actually use this space for our older children, games room, media room. Thank you.
Thank you. Member, that answer your question?
Yeah. I just want to say thank you for that clarification. As I say, I did a site visit there. Not to get political anyway here, but I struggle with the 25% policy. You don't want a 25% added to a 600 square foot cottage or 25% added to a 3,000 square foot cottage. I think that's something that needs to be reviewed. I have no issue with what you're doing there. Look very tasteful. And that's the joys of having a 70-year-old cottage to start with.
Thank you.
Thank you, Member Schmidt. Member Jarvis, any comments?
Further to Member Schmidt's comments, Curtis, maybe you can help me here. It's the orientation of the plans. If we look at the proposal main floor and then look at the second floor changes. Yeah, so for instance, actually, even if we look at the second floor, I'm really getting confused here. The orientation of the page you just showed us a moment ago with the different tones of green in it, where is the lake in relation to that plan?
The bottom.
Well, then where's the lake? And
I might be able to, Curtis, maybe go to the survey. So the green, so basically like in relation to that floor plan, the bottom would be the lake. So it's kind of reversed. So if Curtis, if you put your cursor on the left side of this green box, that is the larger of the two currently inaccessible attic areas that we wish to open up.
And essentially, you're just going under the roof, correct?
100%, yeah. So the roof lines, all that doesn't change. The building envelope doesn't change. Just previously, it was going to be closed off roof space. That wasn't going to be living space or conditioned, and now it's going to be opened up. Ideally, if you guys pass this, it'll be opened up to become living space.
And there is a door going into it somewhere.
Yeah. So I think that wall is actually just going to open up, and same with on the other one.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
Thank you for your help on that. That's all I needed.
All right, thank you. Member Jarvis, Member Pretko.
Thank you, Chair. Just one question, and it's maybe for the planning department rather than for the applicant. I noticed in the original lost the wind I'm looking for here again. In the original cottage floor plan that was provided, this is a 2-bedroom cottage and is modest, and I think the addition is in keeping and it isn't excessive in any way. My only concern is that the original cottage was a 2-bedroom cottage and the septic would have been sized appropriately for a 2-bedroom cottage. The additions that are listed as a closet, I just want to note, is larger than the 2nd bedroom in your previous cottage, as is the games room. And while I don't question that these will be used as a closet or as a games room, I do suspect that there's probably more opportunity for more people to sleep in the dwelling. And I just want to know if we're confident that the septic system and the septic bed would be able to facilitate the larger cottage. Even though it's still called a 2-bedroom cottage, I just think there's opportunity that maybe there's possible for more people to sleep over.
Yeah, thank you. And through you, Mr. Chair, I would just note that through the 2022 building permit, the building department would have reviewed the proposal against the capacity of the existing septic. And typically the calculation for that includes bedrooms and fixture units. In this case, the applicant is proposing a walk-in closet. The additional space would just be an additional walk-in closet and a games room, which wouldn't further increase the need for capacity in the septic. So I think from that perspective, it's been vetted through the building department and was deemed to be okay.
If I could, sorry, Mr. Chair.
Mr. Smith. Yeah.
Just again, further courtesies, the original building permit, right, for the green striped area and all the rest of it was definitely reviewed from building department in terms of septic. This is a amendment then probably to their building permit, of which it still goes back to the building department to see whether or not that, so for example, let's say they added 4 or 5 bedrooms, of course, the question then comes up, is the septic system proposed or existing or whatever it is still adequate within that? So it does have to go back to them again. And if they determine that the additional space under the attic roof is going to be converted needs to have septic, then that will be their call under their legislation.
Thank you for the clarification.
Yes, thank you. That's good knowledge to know. Thank you, Mr. Smith. Adam Rivet, any comments?
I have no concerns with the application, the amendment, and the report was very clear. I have no questions or concerns. Thank you.
Thank you. I'll just comment. I was there myself, and I find myself getting caught a little bit in like this structure's already there, but part of it's not living space, so therefore it's it's not considered GFA. The view from the canoe or the view from the top of the hill as you drive down to Michelle's cottage, it's unchanged, right? So it's an interesting concept anyway. So just an observation. So. That being said, any other comments before I read the resolution? Seeing none. Moved by Member Jarvis, seconded by Member Rivet. Be it resolved that the Township of Georgian Bay Committee of Adjustments approve minor variance application 23-04 to zoning bylaw 2014-75 as amended for 503 Berwick Road to permit an increase in the existing gross floor area of the single detached dwelling, pardon me, by 36% to a maximum gross floor area of 161 square meters with the following conditions. That the owner provide a property tax certificate or correspondence from Township Financial Services indicating that all property taxes have been paid up to date with respect to the property that is the subject of this decision. That this decision applies only to the addition as indicated on Schedule A and Schedule B attached to and forming part of this decision. Any other variants that may appear on the schedules that are not listed in the written decision are not authorized. That this decision expire 3 years from the date of decision if building permit has not been issued for the development. All those in favor, please indicate by raising your hand. And that is carried.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, members of the committee.
Okay, last item on this docket today is a staff report on Bill 23, and I guess over to the planning department.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. To say that planning rules in Ontario are changing is probably a misnomer. And in fact, I think the province issued within the last 2, 3, whatever this is week, an extensive number of changes, some wacky, welcome to the province, some well received, some it just continues to change. This one here, this notice to yourselves in particular is overdue in terms of when it was passed in terms of Bill 23. And it is an information report, as you can see only. And it is important in the sense that removal of third-party rights for appeal are important in Ontario planning law, right? It's been a long-standing provision that if you as a neighbor or community member or whatever it is disagree with the decision of a township or a committee of adjustment, had a place to go outside of that, right? Which was the Ontario Municipal Board, LPAT, the OLT, and all the rest of it, in order to voice your concerns. The current government is taking a look at that in terms of not just probably workload, but also hindering development in Ontario in terms of one of their strong mandates for housing and everything else, and said, listen, townships, municipalities, cities, you have a legally constituted committees or councils and all the rest of it. They are representative of the community. They are, in some cases, counselors of the community that sit on these things. And, there is a place and time for them to have made the decisions. And, therefore said, the third parties have the right to come and put in front of you their concerns over over an application, to have you voice that as they would at the OLT, and for you to give due consideration to their concerns when there's something provided, at least. And we saw today that, in one particular was kind of tough to figure out, what is the objection, right? So in that regard, like I said, the legislation has changed to remove those third-party appeal rights. Within the report, it does say, for example, agencies, the district, the province retains their rights within that to go forward. But our notices out to individuals now on decisions is that here's the decision, but oh, by the way, there is no appeal. We still have to send the decisions out to them, but it does now include a clause that they have no appeal rights, which means participating here today, so on and so forth, is extremely important to the process. And of course, that makes a lot of sense, as you are the decision makers on that front end for both consents and for minor variances. So again, for your information.
Thank you, Mr. Smith. I'm sure the councilors would be really pleased to hear about this. Member Jarvis.
Just point of clarification, I think I got it right. So they can make a presentation to us still, but it's the appeal process that has been shut down by Bill 23. I've got that right?
Correct.
Okay.
And this only applies to these two here. We're not talking zonings which go to planning council or to OPAs, right? Okay, these are for this committee here. Yeah.
Final resolution, be it moved by member Schmidt, seconded by member Predko, that the staff report on Bill 23 changes to appeal rights for minor variances and consents be received for information purposes only. All those in favor, please raise their hand.
Thank you.
And the last one, moved by member Rivet, seconded by member Jarvis. Be it resolved that the Township of Georgian Bay does now adjourn at 11:40 a.m. until May 12th, 2023 at 10 o'clock or at the call of the chair. All those in favor, please signify by raising your hand. Let it be noted to Mr. Hill that this is the earliest closing we've had, I believe.